Hello and welcome everyone to our next session, Leveraging Synergies for Virtual and Hybrid Events. My name is Chris Ocampo. I work here with SYS. Before we begin our session with Chris and Jeannie, I do have a few technical reminders for everyone to share. Chris, could you advance to the next slide, please? Great, thanks. So if you're having any technical difficulties, there's the Need Help tab on the event platform. We have results direct, being there to monitor any of your questions coming in. We're able to help you out. So now I will love to turn the presentation over to our two speakers and give them a chance to introduce themselves. We have Christopher Boomsma and Jeannie Plemer. Please take it away. Thank you.
All right, well, thanks so much. Thank you for the introduction, Chris. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. We are very excited to present to you today, but also interact with you. We hope there's a nice interactive Q&A at the end, and we certainly encourage you to submit questions throughout, but more on that in a second from my colleague, Jeannie. I am Chris Boomsma, and I'll introduce myself here in a second. Jeannie will introduce herself more thoroughly as well, but first we want to talk about our presentation today. As you've probably read, our presentation is about leveraging synergies for virtual and hybrid events, and we're really going to talk about that natural synergy that we think exists between a meetings department and an education department, or a meetings group and an education group. There are certainly other synergies that can be used and leveraged for virtual and hybrid events, but that's a key one that we think can be really tapped into and used for the benefit of your organization. So we're going to speak to a lot of the practicals around that, and hopefully you leave with some great ideas. So we'll start off with speaker introductions. We're then going to give you a historical perspective of our organization. And it's certainly not a promotion for our organization, but instead we want to give you an idea of what our organization looks like, because that shapes how we act within the meetings department, education, and interact with our other departments, and how we put on certain events and things like that. So it lends perspective to the situation. We're also going to talk about the Great Pivot, a term that's maybe a little bit overused, but we want to talk about the impact of COVID-19 and the period leading up to it, and then after it, and how things have really changed for meetings and education, which you've probably heard about extensively, but what we did during that pivot and how we started working together more and offering some new opportunities and sort of pivoting our business models. We're going to go through some key lessons learned. I'll go through those. Jeannie's going to offer some comments, and then we want to give you some really practical tips on building out virtual and hybrid events, some things to consider. I'll have my own, mainly from the education perspective. Jeannie's going to come in and give her tips, principally from the meeting side of things. And then we really want to focus on the opportunity-rich future. There's been a lot of negatives with COVID. There's been a lot of challenges, but we think it has also opened up a lot of opportunities for all of you and your organizations to succeed in a hybrid and a virtual environment in the future. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And then we're going to finish with a question and answer session. So with that, any comments here, Jeannie?
Nope. Besides, Salt Lake City is the sponsor of this session, and we're all excited about it.
Right on. We do ask you to be very engaged. Ask questions throughout. Jeannie and I are both going to be monitoring the chat feature. And if we see something that should be asked at that moment to the other presenter, we're going to try to do that. We'll just interject and do that. Otherwise, we'll look at a lot of those questions and comments at the end of this time too. So think about those things, and please be asking us, because we don't have enough slides, quite frankly, to talk for a full hour. We want to be engaged with you all. Okay, moving on to the next thing. I'm going to briefly introduce myself. So I am Chris Boomsma, as I said, Director of Education here at the societies that we call the American Society of Agronomy, Crop Science Society of America, and Soil Science Society of America. It's three societies working together. We're going to refer to them from here on out as ASA, CSSA, and SSSA. Here I lead a team of education technology professionals to provide virtual, hybrid, and in-person training. So it's a newer team. It's a growing team, as you can imagine, with things changing, and a very aggressive team that is building as we go, building rapidly, and benefiting from working with meetings in a variety of ways. Previously worked as a researcher and a strategist, both in the public and private sectors, mainly in the biotech fields. So it's a pleasure to be with you all today. If you'd like to link up with me on LinkedIn so that we can further this discussion, please scan that QR code. Now handing it over to you, Jeannie.
Excellent. I'm Jeannie Plemer. I am Associate Director of Meetings for the societies. And my team and I build roughly between 15 and 30 meetings a year. Our main one is our annual meeting. And we work hard to connect members through these engaging meetings. We also are, as many of you are, in the virtual, hybrid, in-person conglomeration of figuring everything out. And I did lead our association's pivot to virtual meetings in 2020. And so we had to all come together and kind of figure out how we were progressing forward. And I know some of you are in that exact same spot.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Jeannie. At this time, we do have a number of poll questions for everyone. And we're going to ask you these questions to sort of set the stage for what we talk about as we go through this presentation. We want to gauge a little bit who our audience is and what they're thinking about. So Chris, our moderator, if you'd be so kind as to launch that first poll question now, we'd appreciate it. And if everyone could answer, we would definitely appreciate that too. We're hoping for strong engagement here. So we're just going to hold on a second here and at least get hopefully to 75% participation. That would be fantastic. Awesome. Oh, wow, we're getting past it. That's fantastic. Maybe Chris here, we can end it here soon. And it's looking pretty good.
It's very helpful for us to know between this and the questions that you can put in the chat who we're speaking to. And again, to reiterate what Chris said as we go along, feel free to kind of help direct the presentation to the things that you want us to talk about.
Absolutely. Well, it looks like education is outnumbered by meetings today. That's all right. So we're going to make sure we have a strong meetings component to this discussion here today. I definitely want to emphasize that. So that's great, Chris. If you could stop sharing poll 1, we'll go on to the next poll, please, when you get a chance.
And poll 2 is, what is the greatest challenge that you have when moving towards virtual and hybrid events? All right, so far it looks like vendor and technology selection and event design are in the lead, but we will share the results here soon. And we'll wait for a few more to participate. There's a little bit there to read.
Yeah. Very good. Well, it looks like we're about maxed out there, Chris, on participation. So when you're ready, we can probably end that poll. And it's interesting. What do you think about those results? Event design, vendor and technology selection, and profitability. Jeannie, any comments, any thoughts on that?
I think we're all thinking the same,
Yeah,
right?
I think so too.
Vendor and technology selection, how to design the hybrid, in-person, fully virtual, all of us planners, that's where we have to start.
Yep, right on. And I think as we've gone through this more and more, profitability has become a bigger thing because, the first year, folks pivoted to virtual meetings and sometimes out of pure necessity. And yes, the financials matter. But as we go through this longer, the question becomes, how do we truly make this a profitable business model? And that's something we've struggled with here. And that is something we're going to share today, by the way. So with that, I think I'm going to get rolling now into the historical perspective. Thank you very much, Chris. I think we're done with the polling, and I appreciate you doing that for us today. All right, moving on now to the historical perspective on our organization. As I said, we're going to refer to ourselves as ASA, CSSA, and SSSA. We're Progressive International Scientific Professional Societies. Some of you probably are also fit that bill. We are definitely international. And we definitely have a focus on agronomy, crop science, and soil science. So all the sciences that go into a lot of aspects of crop production, principally in North America, but around the globe, that is what we touch. And it's a lot of different diverse sciences. And it's a very set of interesting fields to work in. So that's where we are. You can see our membership and certified professional numbers on your screen at this time. You can see 7,000, 4,000, 6,000 members respectively for the 3 organizations. It gives you an idea, and Jeannie can speak to this a little bit more here, on the impacts of the size of our annual meeting and our sort of membership ranks in general. And then the next one, and I can speak a little bit more to this because we have certified professionals, and that's who I principally focus our education programs towards. ASA and Triple SA have 13,800 certified professionals respectively. And so that the science that our members do, we try to translate that science over to our certified professionals. And you're going to see that when we talk about some of our product offerings. So our annual meetings more focused on our members, our other offerings are sometimes more focused on our certified professionals. And we'll go over that here shortly. Like many of you, each society is governed by a board of directors. And we have a diverse array of departments, again, probably similar to what all you have experienced and work with day to day. Staff work across meetings, education, publications, certification, membership, science communication, science policy, and governance. You will note, however, that I bolded meetings and education because that, as I said, is who we represent today. And that's the synergy we really want to focus on. Anything I missed, Jeannie, talking about our organization that you would like to point out?
Not at this time.
All right, very good. Moving on, and I'm going to hand it over to Jeannie now to talk about the annual meeting.
Absolutely. Karen posted in the chat that, over time, trade shows continue to die in many associations and areas, and we need to find new ways to integrate supplier and vendors into those meetings. And so we will talk a little bit about that as we go through our presentation, but sponsors and exhibitors, trying to get them engaged, it's a conversation that could probably be it can be its own session. So at our annual meeting, it is an international annual meeting. The one I'm talking about now is generally our in-person meeting, and I will go into our virtual offering of last year a little bit more. And so the 4-day event brings in usually around 4,000 attendees. It's a traditional member audience, which for us is university, college, industry, and government, and also students. We host the meeting at various locations throughout the US. We do have people who attend from 60 different countries, but statistically speaking, majority of attendees are from the United States. We do offer a modest registration cost. We do not include a lot of food and beverage complimentary within our registration costs, so that does allow us to keep it relatively affordable. But as you all know, registration cost really varies across the board. We do have decent sponsorship support, which ties into that whole exhibitor trade show. How do we connect them? How do we engage them? How do we, whether it be a virtual meeting or in person, how do we get attendees to engage with the exhibitors and the sponsors? Our in-person annual meeting has been going on for over 100 years, and it is solidly profitable. We are actually mandated by our boards to make a profit. Our annual meeting helps support non-revenue generating areas of our association, and it allows those areas to continue offering member support. So for example, our science policy office, science communication, where we put out press releases and help increase the general public's knowledge of crop, ag, and soil sciences. And so having to be profitable is a pretty tricky thing, because it's all in the end down to that bottom line that many of you indicated is also part of your focus. And then we have limited growth. We don't have a lot of opportunity to funnel to a new audience. It's very tied, registration is very tied to the amount of people who have funding to present their science. And so for the virtual, we did put quite a bit of extra into trying to attract a new virtual audience. But at the end of the day, when we looked at our data, it really didn't shift the needle much. It was still the same percentage of members, non-members, where they came from, et cetera.
Thanks, Jeannie. Yeah, just a few comments there. Jeannie made a very good point about profitability in our annual meeting. And the profitability of meetings like this can be challenging. It's even been mentioned in the chat feature. And what that has forced education to do is become a new center of strong revenue and profit for the organization. And how do we do that? We do so by coordinating with meetings. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit more and how that has worked in the past and how it's changing for the future, okay, as sort of some of these revenue models and business models are changing. So I'm going to go on to the next slide now and talk about another offering that we have. Now, this is an in-person meeting traditionally. This is the Sustainable Agronomy Conference. And unlike the previous meeting, this is focused more on our certified professionals. On the right, there is a map of our certified professionals across North America. These are folks that, as I said earlier, work with our farmers that you and I obviously get food from. They are there to advise these individuals on how best to grow crops. So these advisors work with the farmers, help them with their agronomy, their crops information, their soils information, and the like to help them produce a successful crop. So they have a very different focus than the science-oriented focus of our annual meeting. And they have very different needs and demands and wishes when it comes to education and meetings. So Sustainable Agronomy Conference, we started it a while back, just a few years ago. 2017, 2018 got rolling, shifted it around a little bit, 1.5 day or 1.5 day event, about 250 plus attendees, which frankly, not a whole lot for an in-person meeting, considering we have 13,000 certified professionals. And that is our audience that we're after. But we do move it around the country. That's at least our intention when COVID isn't happening, because agriculture is local. And you want a local meeting adjusted to the local scenario for agriculture. California looks very different than Maine or Iowa when it comes to agriculture, and we have to adjust our events and our education accordingly. The traditional model for this meeting was a low registration cost. And what we found is, despite the low registration costs, you can see we're not necessarily getting a few thousand attendees, are we? Still relatively modest. We had modest sponsorship support that we really appreciated, but it was modest, right? And so eventually what happened is we had a meeting that was barely profitable. It seemed like limited opportunity for growth. And so we're kind of questioning, before COVID hit, what should we be doing with this meeting? Now, I do want to note that this conference was organized with the help of meetings, and that's an important part to point out. This is really driven programmatic-wise by the education department, these in-person meetings, but managing, getting that meeting up and running and organized was very strongly collaborated with by the meetings and education departments jointly. And this is where we got our feet wet working together. And I quickly learned the huge value that meetings departments can bring to an online education department that's growing. Because what I saw was a lot of established procedures and a lot of very good staff, including Jeannie, that were veterans of putting on meetings and could offer perspective that we wouldn't come up with necessarily within the education department. So again, a very natural synergy.
Chris, we do have a question from David.
Sure.
It regards the very hot topic of exhibitors and sponsors.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, how were virtual career fairs leveraged to drive virtual meeting profitability? And if so, how will this be transitioned back to in-person conferences with career fair components? And I know that in the past, we at the Sustainable Agronomy Conference have tried to do a small exhibit trade show, and then it kind of moved away. And then you found great success with virtual sponsorship and a virtual trade show like. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Happy to. Yeah, we had a modest trade show at the Sustainable Agronomy Conference. And while it was good and it got people networking, it wasn't a big profit center for the event, okay? And we then, and I'm going to talk about the pivot to a virtual meeting here shortly, we pivoted obviously strongly in 2020 to a virtual Sustainable Agronomy Conference. And there we had a virtual exhibit hall and all that type of stuff. And I'll talk about those features. And even there, I'm not sure how much people got out of it. And I'm not sure how much our sponsors were really in it for the long haul. But what I'll talk about is we've offered different opportunities to our sponsors to get in front of our audience through our new 2021 program that looks very different than the traditional Sustainable Agronomy Conference, either in person or virtual. And I'll show you what they really want. And what they want is eyes on their logo and on a few other things related to their business. And they didn't need all the other features. It's very, very interesting. How will we transition back? It's a very good question. We're asking ourselves that question right now. For 2022, we intend to go back to California and have an in-person meeting combined with a field tour, partnering with another organization. I can talk about the benefits of partnering with other organizations to help drive profit and bring in a bigger audience in the future. But what we're thinking about too is we're still not sure that that's going to be a highly profitable event. What we're doing in 2021, I think we may very well cover and do in 2022, as well as the in-person meeting. So the virtual, separate from and in addition to the in-person, because that's what we think our sponsors want. So I'll share more about that in the future. Hopefully that gets to that question at least a little bit. Any comments on that idea, Jeannie?
Not at this time. I think my add to that regarding the annual meeting of how we're transitioning back to the in-person career fair, job seekers, exhibit hall feel. We're really focusing on the in-person experience, but we are building into our conference app the ability for all exhibitors and sponsors to have an online presence in a kind of what I would call a modified virtual option within the app. And so they are getting virtual digital recognition and hopefully engagement.
Yeah, right on. Again, it's a very different audience, the two audiences for the conferences. And so that's an important thing to point out. Know your audience. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about practical tips and things like that. A little bit about historical perspective, a little more here, just talking about the online education program. When I came to the organization in 2017, what you saw here, if you were working here, was we had webinars and some minor virtual training curricula. 30 to 500 webinar attendees was the average, I think you could say. Mostly certified professionals. We had an extensive library because remember, we had this huge membership that wants to present to these people working in the field. So we could build out that library. Not sure we were marketing and selling it very well. So we changed that. Moderate, stagnant sales, moderate to slow growth sponsorship support, and overall elusive growth opportunities. The department wasn't growing. And so that has changed greatly. And I'll talk about that more, but I just wanted to set the stage for what this looks like. Okay, so I talked a little bit about the meetings and education collaboration. I'm going to go on this for a little bit more, and then I'm going to ask Jeannie if she has any comments on this. But like I said, it began with the in-person 2018 Sustainable Agronomy Conference when we said, you know, we're putting on these meetings for certified professionals. Why on earth would we try to do it by ourselves? It makes no sense. There's no room or reason for siloing in this instance. It's just not necessary. So it was managed by the meetings department, designed by education. We came together and work together on a good budget. Introduced hybrid learning among staff and certified professionals for the first time. It did, because we actually won a grant to do some live streaming work. We also did some recording work. We threw it into our library for follow-on sales and things like that. We probably didn't leverage that early virtual component as much as we should have, but it got our feet wet, and little did we know what was about to come with COVID, right? So it was kind of fortuitous there. It mandated an internal exploration of technology and staff skill sets. When we came together, it forced us to, as we developed a hybrid meeting before COVID, say, okay, what technology do we need? What do we have? Can we do this internally? Do we have to farm some of this out? Do we need to bring in collaborators? And that started building the process. And that's it's a very important process for any organization to go through when they're doing hybrid events. A big one was, and Jeannie and I talk about this all the time, you need support from leadership, particularly at the C-suite level, because if those leaders aren't on board with how you're working and functioning cross-departmentally as a team, you know, it's not going to work. Plus, they may be thinking your role as a meetings professional or an educational professional should be focused internally in your department. So I think you really need to focus on getting support amongst leadership. We'll talk about that more. It showcased the benefits of collaboration to the organization, kind of was a springboard for follow-on work, and it prepared staff for the great pivot. So anything there, Jeannie, you'd like to add, or any comments I need to address in the chat feature at this time?
Just some questions about logistics regarding building the build in the meeting app, which I can talk about a little bit on my slide.
Okay.
But I do think when it comes to collaboration between departments, having experts represented from the different areas, different key areas, which could be, for example, your boards, your, like for us, we appreciate student voices being represented, the meetings department, budget, etc. And I do think that having a meetings person work with the education department during the design phase helped elicit a stronger end product.
Yep, 100% agree. And I really think that meetings departments, at least what I've experienced, have a beautiful workflow already set up. Jeannie has spreadsheet upon spreadsheet. She's extremely hyper organized. And that's how you have to be probably with these very complex events. And for an organization, or I should say a department that's growing and building new business opportunities and product offerings, it is wonderful to have an established department with established product offerings come and offer certain tools and skill sets to us that we can leverage, because we are growing our team and we don't necessarily have all the processes in place. We have very aggressive team members that are ready to go, but we're kind of, building on the fly to some extent. And as we can bring some of these other tools in from other departments and leverage their expertise, huge benefit. So, okay, let's keep going. So we get through all the slides, of course. The great pivot, as we all probably heard before, hopefully it doesn't sound too ridiculous, but COVID-19 obviously hastened business model and product offering reviews and necessary changes. It probably did at your organization. It certainly did at ours. And like I said before, we knew online education had to step up and grow and bring in profit. It had to happen, especially when we were struggling in other areas because of COVID. So it had to grow and thrive. And meetings had to rapidly pivot and survive, right? It changed dramatically the dollars and cents of everything that was going on there. And naturally, the meetings and education collaboration grew. Thankfully, we had a starting point and we just built from that starting point from 2018. And it blossomed naturally that way. We did have to do some rapid staff upskilling and technology adoption. It just had to happen. We sent people to virtual learning events. We upskilled them as quick as we could, and when necessary, brought in collaborators. So that was great. We also, and I want to emphasize this, we did extensive benchmarking and SWOT analyses to understand, okay, there are other education offerings out there for our certified professionals, for farmers, for students, and our various other audiences. Where do we fit in this space? What can we do right now? What are our strengths? What are our opportunities? And then how do we address those weaknesses? It truly had to be done, and we did that, and we've identified our place in the marketplace, and we've run with it from there. So it's been good. Projects were prioritized and quickly implemented. That's one thing you'll find in virtual education. You have to prioritize because these opportunities are just flowing in rapidly. So you got to have your priorities set forth and implement quickly. You can see everything increased: webinar attendance, podcast listeners, library subscription sales. That was a new business model we threw out there. And then collaborations. People came to us not only to reach our audience, but to leverage our services. And then meetings went fully virtual. So that was the great pivot. Any comments on that great pivot, Jeannie, before I talk about the 2020 Sustainable Agronomy Conference?
Nope, I think just moving forward to be able to talk about budget, event design, and some of the actual logistics of building the meeting are where the questions are resting.
Yep. Okay, we're going to get to those practicalities. So let's keep moving. So what does Sustainable Agronomy Conference become in 2020? And this is interesting. We did a virtual 3-day event, kind of like you see with a lot of virtual events. Long sessions, long days. And I'm just telling you right now, we are not doing that for 2021. So think about that as I go through this. With that 2020 3-day event, we still only had about 250 plus attendees. It's not like we blew the roof off of attendance numbers. Not sure it was actually what our certified professionals wanted, nor our members, because they came too, nor our international audience, which we grew. So interesting. Still had a modest registration cost. And here's the key takeaway there. We were offering a registration cost when a lot of online education was going free and there were other opportunities there. So something to consider there. Decent sponsorship support, those folks who have come along with us in 2018 and 2019 for sustainable agronomy, you know, I don't want to say out of courtesy, but they stuck with us into this virtual event and is much appreciated. It was slightly unprofitable, but there's a reason for that. And that's because it was an annual meeting and technology test bed. If we didn't do that, I think we could have turned a profit. But we had that huge annual meeting coming up in November. This was offered in the summer. Jeannie will be talking about that virtual event. And we had to test technologies. And what I would recommend, maybe she'll say the same, I'll ask her in a sec, you don't want to test everything out first time in your big conference, which has a huge attendee number. We tried something else elsewhere. And so I am going to move on, Jeannie, unless you have a question or a comment for here.
Yeah, Chris, can you talk just a little bit about how we vetted the platform that you ended up using? What was the process of finding your virtual platform?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I remember early on, we started soliciting from people who had been working with various vendors. What do you think? You know, what do you think of these organizations? We also put a list together of these are must-haves, and I think, Jeannie, you were pivotal in this. These are likes, and these are, we really don't need it, but I guess we could do something with it. We also tested, you know, do we have any connections between that virtual platform and our existing IT infrastructure? Is it compatible and the like? So there's some very practical things around there. And of course, cost was something that we looked at right up front. And another key thing, and I want to go back to the annual meeting and technology test bed. We wanted to use a vendor that could potentially be used for future meetings. That was a big deal too. So I would say this, if you want to follow up with this, we'll offer our emails up later. Follow up with us and we can help you better understand that process and give you some of those ideas and lists that we developed for choosing a vendor. And it's a big deal. And you're going to see how we actually change that for 21 here. Any comments there about vendor selection, Jeannie, that you'd like to address?
No, but there is a great one regarding collaboration.
Okay.
Meetings and education collaboration makes so much sense. Interested to hear if publishing folks were involved too. There's so many opportunities to streamline workflows and create more content.
Absolutely. They were not involved, but I can tell you that they're getting involved now. We are trying to figure out how to change some aspects of the publication model. How can we bring virtual into that? How can we cross-utilize some of these things that we're developing and building out as educational products? So we're thinking about that. Now, that being said, pubs would, and this was a nice sort of linkage. I guess there was more linkage than you would think. Our Sustainable Agronomy Conference program, those folks that presented there also sometimes would write short magazine article publications. So it was like follow on. And then what we did, we also had them get involved in our podcast episodes, which are actually at this time run through our publications department. So we would take those folks that we were using for our speaker slots and use them other places. And their messages were varied according to what medium they were using. So higher concepts, higher level ideas were broadcast out through the presentations. The podcast offerings were more conversational. And then the publications where they had graphs and data got a little bit more technical. So you can kind of see how we started. So I guess, you know what, there's more collaboration already happening there than we're doing, but it can be built out more. And we realize that here at our societies. All right, I'm going to just keep rolling, Jeannie, so we keep on getting through this. So I talked about this 2020 virtual event. Look at what we had to do here. Here are the virtual event features, which are more than I think we needed. Actually, we know they were, but it was the test bed. And here are the virtual event key preparation steps we went through. Now, a virtual exhibit hall, I'm not sure our certified professionals really needed that, but we needed it to test out what we could do in preparation for the annual meeting. Networking sessions, we wanted to see how much do people actually network in a virtual meeting versus just want the sessions. Student presentation competitions, a huge facet of our annual meeting. We did not need it at this meeting, but we had to test out oral, posters, all those things in a virtual environment. We did live and pre-recorded presentations. First time we've done that in this sort of setup. We had speaker ready rooms. We don't really do that for our webinars. We kind of just prep them behind the scenes one-on-one. Webcam video streaming, branded frames, interactive features such as using Slido, which we thought was very useful, by the way. If you haven't looked at that tool, please do so, because I found it pretty helpful. It's a great way to pull your audience and interact with them. First time in virtual event preparations. We did a learning needs evaluation, attendance projections, a little bit of a guess in certain ways. Budget creation, we had to do that. It really watched the expenses. Pricing research was a big deal. What is everybody else doing? Is everybody free? Is there some folks charging? And if so, what are they charging? Sponsorship sales were very different, and our marketing professionals handled that very nicely. Event design was a big deal, and you have to know your audience to do that. Virtual conference vendor selection, that was huge. We spend a lot of time doing that. And sometimes I wonder if we do too much for just around the vendor selection, and if you need to actually have a vendor. I'm going to go over that. In certain cases, yes. In certain cases, maybe not. Maybe you can do it internally. Event promotion was different. And then we had follow-on content sales, a big part of any virtual or hybrid event. You have to resell that material. And so that was a new paradigm for us. Any thoughts here, Jeannie, you'd like to share, or any questions I need to address?
There's been a few questions, but it's more in regards to logistics that I will talk about when I get to the virtual annual meeting.
Perfect. All right. So what do we look like in 2021? And I want to bring this up because it's sort of a very different approach to a virtual meeting. We have an ongoing, it's actually happening right now, not at this moment, obviously, but we're in the big 6-week portion of it. 2021 virtual event. It is 6 weeks, 2 hour per week format, just 2 hours on one day. It's a collaborative venture with another organization we partner with naturally for the Sustainable Agronomy Conference, and they are building out a virtual farm tour component to it. So we're working together to make that offering as interactive as we think we can. There's no registration costs, huge pivot for us, right? Strong sponsorship support. And why is that? It is principally because I said 2,400 diverse attendees. We are now up to 2,800 people who are registered for this event. We blew the numbers out of the water. How? Because we did such a good job of promoting our webinars and building out our webinars. It has therefore impacted our virtual meeting. So this is a classic example of another product offering impacting something else within the organization and helping build out a bigger virtual profile. So with that amount of sponsorship support, we think this is going to be a very profitable meeting for us. It's a very focused, efficient event though. And everybody from sponsors to attendees wanted that focused, efficient, excellent management of their time, not commanding too much of it. They're there partly for CEUs, which is certified, the education units that they need. And they're there to get very sound science that is not a commercial, and that's unbiased, and that's inclusive. And when we deliver that, you can see where our attendee numbers go and that we can turn a profit. So take a note. The last thing I'm going to say, it's a very alternative business model. No registration cost. We're strictly going off sponsorship support and our ability to bring in a huge audience. And that has changed us tremendously. That's not necessarily going to be the case for a virtual annual meeting or a hybrid annual event. And Jeannie can get to that.
Can you speak a little bit more to that free aspect, Chris, of yes, you had strong sponsorship support, but why did you decide to flip it to free?
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe I should have talked about the fact that we did this internally. I'm sorry I didn't focus on that. And it's a great question. We can obviously, when we do an internal production, we know how much it costs every hour, every single day for our staff and use of our technologies. We easily came up with a cost estimate. And then we easily saw the sponsorship dollars that were coming in and could very easily forecast that we thought it was going to be profitable. And we're still confident of that. That is a big change. We decided to go away from a virtual conference vendor, use our own existing technologies, which we use GoToWebinar and some other things, use our own LMS and offer it internally. Because this audience, I'm not saying every audience, but this audience didn't need all the bells and whistles of certain virtual events. They don't want it. They don't need it. They're there for a very specific reason. And it works with our audience. And it apparently works with more people out there than we thought because they're coming into our meeting in droves. They want the sound science, but they don't necessarily want to pay for it because they know they can find it elsewhere, but they trust our quality content. So quality content at no charge was a winning combination. So.
And there's a few more logistical questions that I really do think speaks to the audience we have here today. So maybe you could spend a couple minutes answering questions here if you don't mind.
Sure, no problem.
So you mentioned that part of the reason you gained all these sponsorships was because of how you promoted your webinars, that they got so much traction that it attracted these sponsors. What did you guys do differently to promote those webinars, to create that buzz in the end to get all that sponsorship?
That's a good point. Well, we figured out how to market appropriately with email. Our audience trusts our program very strongly, and emails, actually, of all things, are the best way to get to them. And when they see our emails come in, they trust the information source and sign up. They want that direct messaging. So when they saw that we were offering more virtual education for a virtual conference, they sucked it up right away. And in the midst of COVID, you have to remember that there weren't a lot of options. These people typically go to regional or even statewide or even county level meetings to get their education. They didn't have that opportunity. So they saw the benefit of us offering the science to them through free webinar offerings and some at cost, but many with sponsorship support. And they came to us. And those sponsors saw their reach very quickly. We did everything we could to build up our attendee numbers. Another way we did that is we partnered with other organizations and we jointly offered educational offerings together. And so we attracted their audience. And once we attracted their audience once, we were finding we're attracting their audience routinely. And it's probably the same for them too. And we hope that is, because our partner organizations can both benefit from that. And it's been this pile-on effect. And once they start coming, as you probably know, you have a record that they were there. And so we can further correspond with these people. And so it's just ballooned and blossomed from there.
And do you think you'll be able to retain the sponsors for future meetings and conferences?
I think so. You know, you never know what it.
How are you doing? Like, how are you highlighting the sponsors and exhibitors?
We call them out at the beginning. Okay, you know what? We should have had Eric on. Our colleague Eric handles a lot of the marketing, but we call them out in the meeting. They're in our social media. They are in the email blasts going out. Our session exclusive, we have a few high-paying sponsors. We give a little bit of a blurb during the event about them. But here's the thing, we don't go overboard because we found that our audience does not want a commercial. They work in an industry where there's plenty of commercials already, trying to get them to buy products to sell to growers, okay? They came for the science, so we have to be very cognizant that they don't want too much. And there's that right balance. And that's, I think, the way to go, because you can push it overboard and drive them crazy. But with the sponsors just want enough exposure. They don't want too much either. They want to be seen as a supporter of science without the commercial. They want that too. They just want folks to know that, hey, we do sound science at these organizations, and that science results in these products. Come check us out. They're very good about that.
And then one more question about the finance budget aspect before we move into a couple about event design on this.
Yeah.
Can I assume that this model you'll try again in the future to see if you get the same level of sponsor support? And if you do, you'll probably continue the free model, or will you try to flip it back to a paid model at any point? And what was your thought process about that? Sometimes when you offer things for free, it's pretty hard to start charging again in the future.
It is, absolutely. I agree. We're going to stick with this for 2022 and continue the experiments. But in 2022, remember I said we're going to California as well for an in-person meeting. My intention there is to run that in-person event because California is an agricultural hotspot and a place that people often want to go for tours and stuff, because we go to Napa and things like that. Who wouldn't want to go there? But we're going to repurpose the content from that virtual tour, from that tour, and any presentations given there, and we'll incorporate that into our virtual event too, that we can offer for free. Now, people won't get to see and be there live, but we're thinking about repurposing this material. It's going to be very hard for me to ever walk away from this now. The sponsors are extremely energetic about how this is going, and they're excited about the future offerings. And our partner organizations, that our collaborator too, is extremely excited about their reach. They've never had this kind of reach, and they don't want to give that up either. It's going to be hard for me to give it up. So that's the honest goodness truth. Once you hit profit,
Right.
and honestly, here's the thing, folks. Once you do this once and you're profitable because you can keep internal production costs down, I would hope you keep driving those costs down over time and increasing profit.
And kudos to your department, because you kind of put your neck out there, so to speak, to try something new, to try to build new revenue streams. And not
Right.
everything that we've tried has been this successful, this quickly, or ever. And so I
Right.
think this is a good demonstration of, change really does push us to be flexible and try new things to reach our members and our audience where they're at.
That's right, Jeannie.
A couple questions about the event design, and then we'll move forward.
Sure.
But I do want to spend a little time on this because our audience did indicate that this is what they're interested in.
Yep.
We have a question as to how or if you're incorporating networking in, or if you're facilitating anything between the attendees and the sponsors, or is it primarily just one-way engagement?
For this event, it's primarily one-way engagement. This is what this audience wants for this type of event. They want to come for their education, they want the latest science, and they want their CEUs. This goes back to understanding where you fit in the larger marketplace. They have other opportunities to network. Our scientists, for example, network heavily at the annual meeting. Our certified professionals, however, do not necessarily want to network at this meeting. They see each other out in the field, they go to their regional meetings. What we've done is identified where we fit in this world, and then we get in there and we're all hands on the deck with that business model. And that goes back to surveying and knowing your audience. And as your audience grows, though, believe me, we're going to re-survey that audience and understand who they are and what they want. Because if they're more international and there's more scientists coming and things like that, we got to think about these things and adjust.
And did you have a Q&A, or if they had a question, how did they engage with the presenters or other attendees?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's heavy Q&A sessions. We run videos, we have presentations, we have panel discussions, and we have extremely heavy Q&A. We engage people through polling. We engage them through the chat feature. All presenters provide their follow-up email because we never get through all the questions that are asked. And we do know that people follow up with our presenters one-on-one. So we do that. But guess what I'm saying? We deliver the science one way, but there is heavy question and answer time. And we did in our first session offer a follow-on networking session. It was modestly attended, but again, people weren't necessarily there for that. And they'll find other ways to network.
Great. I think that's been a good discussion of the budget and the event design. There are a few more questions out there that I've noted to pick up in my portion of the presentation a little bit
Good.
later. So thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Jeannie. Let's go over to you now on the annual meeting side.
Okay, so yes, on to some details. You all have or are trying to figure out, what are we doing? What have we been doing? What didn't work? What do we need to do? What do we think the future is going to look like? And so let me give you a quick highlight of what we did for our large meeting. This is the 4,000 attendee one that's typically in person. We had to pivot it, and I know we all don't enjoy the pivot word, but it's the best description here. This is what we did to pivot in 2020. And then I'll talk a little bit about what we are planning for this year. So 2020 was a completely virtual event. Earlier, somebody asked if our virtual siphoned any of our in-person attendees. And due to the pandemic, we didn't offer any in-person. We will for 2021. And we're actually not concerned about it siphoning attendees. It's more the virtual or limited virtual, as we call it, definitions, what is hybrid, what is blended. We call it a limited virtual. It's pre-recorded offerings where they can chat with each other via email. It's not a live scheduled, it's a consume on their own time virtual option. And so that virtual offering is opening it up to people who have travel bans and can't attend in person. We wouldn't get those people in person anyways. It's people in other countries who can't get into our country, who can't afford to attend. And so in our association, we're not seeing this limited virtual registration option take any of our in-person. If anything, we're slightly projecting growth by adding a virtual option in to meet people where they're at. So in 2020, we ended up having 3,400-ish attendees for our virtual only production, which we were hoping for more. We normally have 4,000. We were really hoping that the virtual would open up a huge new virtual audience. We did put money into marketing to try to attract that virtual audience. So we committed and we didn't see the results. And again, that goes back to where we just have a limited audience. If they have the money and the science to present, whether it be in person or virtually, that's really what drives our registration. Our virtual only event in 2020 was primarily our average audience. And we kept our registration cost at $300 for members. This is such a hot topic. How do you budget? How do you pay for this? As we move into 2021, how do we pay for in-person and a virtual option? And it really comes down to what can we afford? And as I mentioned earlier, we have that mandate where we have to make money for our association. And that's why we chose the limited virtual option. In 2020, we did a complex meeting. We took our complete in-person meeting and put it into a 5-day event. We went from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Central with no breaks. We had 2,800 pre-recorded presentations. We had 350 live or simulive sessions. We had an exhibit hall, a career fair. We had everything. When we talked to vendors, they said, wow, this is one of the more complex meetings we have seen. Some vendors turned us down because it was too complex for their software. My recommendation would be that you have to pare it down in the virtual world. They want to consume on their own time with some live interaction amongst their peers and the presenters. So do what you can to find out, survey, question, et cetera, what does your potential audience want, and then design and build around that and your budget. So in the 3.5 months we had to pivot, we sourced platforms and we are still sourcing. I think that this is one thing where as meeting planners, we all hope we'll find the magical platform and then we'll learn it and we'll use it forever and ever. And this is just not the way technology goes. We chose a platform in 2020 that had artificial intelligence to try to help our audience find sessions because we had thousands of sessions that they might be interested in. And honestly, the money was not worth it because it didn't elevate their experience enough for the cost. They eventually found the sessions that they wanted to attend, artificial intelligence or not. And so I think a lot of it is just trial and error. You know, you have to kind of stretch yourself. You have to stretch your members. You have to remember everything is new to everybody the first year. We always say that they'll hate it the first year. They'll start to tolerate it the second year. And by the third year, if you try to take it away from them, they'll say it's the new best thing ever. And so give things time, keep your eye out open for technology. One of the questions out there was, how did we choose timing when we designed our event? And we generally choose timing and keep it the same as what the timing would be if we were in person. We had to go a little bit longer each day because we had so much content. But we also figure in a virtual world, they can re-watch content on their own time. It does allow for a little less engagement, but given that a huge percentage of our attendees are within a couple time zones of each other, we use that as our decision base. There was a question about the app build, and we are working with our abstract submission provider to actually build in a virtual exhibit hall, essentially, which are videos and materials that the attendees can go in and check out as they go along. And so that's a highlight of our 2020 annual meeting and what we have coming up.
Perfect.
Are there any questions in there, Chris?
You know, Jeannie, I think we've got 5 minutes left, so we better get through our lessons learned and practical tips. What do you say?
Sounds good.
And we'll give you our emails, folks, so that you can reach out. Very briefly, we've covered a lot of these key lessons learned. You have to establish a proper vision for your event. You know, a vision looks different for each thing. Think about that. Again, leadership must be supportive of it. You got to change your business models as we go into this new world. And I've talked about some opportunities there. You have to do competitive intelligence. I learned that when I worked in the corporate research environments. It's just as applicable here. You have to understand your competitors, what they're doing, and adapt accordingly. Understand, and this is key, what are the department responsibilities? What is each department doing otherwise, and what can they take on as they collaborate? And how are the revenue and the costs going to be handled? It's very important because still folks look at how a department performs at each within our organization. Collaborate across departments for the project, but still watch those responsibilities, revenue, and costs, especially as it pertains to all department jobs. Proper project management is business critical. I learned that very well from Jeannie when we went about building meetings. They have a great model there. Communication must be open. You have to be highly collaborative, and you got to get along with the folks you're working with and find people who have complementary skills. Products and services must be collaboratively evaluated and prioritized. Each department has a say. Virtual conference vendors and technology providers must be properly vetted. We talked about that, and ask yourself if you can do it internally or not. And critically, pricing, sponsorships, and cost control are absolutely critical if you want these things to pencil out in the end. All right, I'm going to go through my practical tips and then let Jeannie finish up on hers. So, as I said before, survey and respect customer needs. That is so critical. You have to understand your audience and your customer, because then you can customize product offerings. I really think there's value in growing audience size, and I talked about ways to do that, and diversity, because then you have new ways to market alternative products from other departments, whether it be membership, publications, or the like. There should be cross-marketing and sales going on there, and that comes from a solid size audience, including new people. Prudently build marketing investments, but you don't need to go overboard. Jeannie and I have some knowledge there about things that can go wrong with marketing too, and not just all rosy type stuff. Aggressively pursue sponsorships. I think we all know that, but it's made a big difference in education for us. Market your audience size and your speaker quality. We found that that was pivotal, and I talked about that before. Cross-promote, I touched on that. Use your conference and other educational content other ways. We throw some of this stuff into our library, which we sell through a subscription model, which is kind of all the rage, right? When you think of Netflix and the like, it's a new business model, and it's doing very, very well for us. So we have to feed that library, and these conferences do that. Use internal resources when possible. Leverage external collaborations for growing your audience, building out other ideas and products too. Reconsider the virtual conference vendor need. In some situations, it is a need. In others, not necessarily. Okay, just when do you need it? You have to identify that. And never forget the organizational and departmental missions. Keep that in mind as you do all of this. Jeannie, in our remaining time, I want to give you time to give your practical tips.
Great, and I'll just do a quick highlight because you guys have access to these slides. I'll spend most of my time on manage change. So change can be a very good thing for associations. It keeps us flexible. It makes us better prepared for the future, but it can be difficult for members and staff. And so please manage your change, meet people with where they're at, find different ways to educate them. You know, even in this meeting, we are still unsure. What does hybrid and blended and simulive and what are all those terms? Can you imagine what your staff and your members feel like? So don't forget to educate. And I will actually go to the next slide or ask Chris to go to the next slide. This is the second biggest point I want to get through is celebrate successes. Oh my gosh, we get so tied in budgets and design and the weeds and creating these experiences, and we create them. And we just need to take a moment to celebrate our successes. however that is. But recognize your vendors, recognize your team, all of that great stuff, and look forward to the future.
Yep, I agree with Jeannie. We'll end on that. Look forward to the future because there is a bright future for these collaborations and for new product offerings and for education and meetings. Working together, you can build profit and revenue. So that's our final message. I wish we had time for more Q&A and everything, but thank you for all the questions that were submitted. Let me bring up our emails here, Chris, to finish this off, if you don't mind.
Great, yes. And we do invite all of you to reach out to us. We thank Salt Lake because they sponsored this. Our annual meeting is there in November and we can't wait. I just was out there last month and we are all in this together. So reach out to us and we will try to take the time to do what we can to answer any questions.
Absolutely. Chris, is that all the time we have? I doubt that there's time to go on. We have follow-on sessions and networking, or would you like us to talk a little bit more and take questions? What do you folks prefer there?
Yeah, I apologize, everyone. This is a great session, but we do have to cut off at 1:45.
Yep.
We have a quick 15-minute break. I'm sorry. I am on Central Time. So we do have a quick 15-minute break before our last session. This is just also another reminder that to please participate in the Partner Passport game. And you could submit your answers by 3 p.m. Eastern Time. So there's some great prizes in there. So make sure to check that out too.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Chris, for moderating today.
All right. Thank you. Great job, guys.
Take care.